Every father knows the weight of a promise made to his child, and every worker knows the sting of being treated as if their family doesn't matter. When Mateo Cruz lost his wife to cancer, he promised her he would take their 8-year-old son on a beach camping trip every summer. Mateo works as a marine technician in San Diego, fixing expensive yachts for wealthy clients. His boss, Cassandra Vale, is a billionaire CEO who only cares about money and sees her employees as numbers on a spreadsheet. When Mateo asks for 1 week off to keep his promise to his late wife, Cassandra says no without even looking up from her desk. She tells him the company is too busy to spare anyone, even though Mateo is the best mechanic they have. But life has a way of teaching lessons to those who need them most. A few days later, Cassandra's prized $4 million yacht breaks down right before her most important business meeting. Every expert she calls fails to fix it. With her career on the line, she has no choice but to ask the same man she just rejected for help. Will Teo save the day for the billionaire boss who crushed his simple dream? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the San Diego harbor as Mateo Cruz walked through the marina gates at Vale Marine Services. His weathered hands clutched a thermos of coffee and the same worn leather toolbox his father had carried for 30 years before him. The salty breeze carried the familiar scent of diesel fuel and ocean spray that had become as much a part of his daily routine as breathing itself. At 34, Mateo had the steady hands of a craftsman and the quiet confidence of a man who understood machines better than most people understood themselves. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray gift from 2 years of sleepless nights after Maria's diagnosis, then the months of treatments, and finally the long nights alone with Diego after she was gone. The simple gold wedding band on his left hand caught the light as he adjusted his grip on the toolbox, a reminder of promises made and a love that death couldn't diminish. The marina bustled with the controlled chaos of a luxury yacht service operation. Gleaming vessels worth more than most people's homes lined the docks, their pristine white hulls reflecting the morning light like mirrors. Crew members in crisp uniforms prepared for another day of catering to the wealthy, while technicians in coveralls focused on the mechanical hearts that kept these floating palaces running. Mateo's workstation occupied a corner of the main maintenance bay, where he'd spent the last 8 years earning a reputation as the man who could fix anything. His colleagues had long ago stopped questioning how he could diagnose problems that stumped factory-trained specialists. They simply brought him their most challenging cases and watched him work his quiet magic with circuits and engines. "Morning, Teo," called out Roberto, a younger mechanic who'd been learning the trade under Mateo's patient guidance. "Got a tricky one for you, the Martinez yacht's having electrical issues again." Mateo nodded, already mentally cataloguing the potential causes. The Martinez family owned a 60-foot sports yacht with a notoriously temperamental navigation system. Most technicians would run diagnostics for hours, but Mateo had learned to listen to the subtle sounds that machines made when they were struggling. "Check the grounding wire behind the helm station," he said, setting down his toolbox. "It's been working loose for weeks. The symptoms match a gradual connection failure." Roberto grinned and headed off to investigate. Within 20 minutes, he was back with a thumbs up. "Loose ground wire, just like you said. How do you always know?" "You listen," Mateo replied simply. "Machines tell you what's wrong if you pay attention." It was the same advice his father had given him as a boy, working on fishing boats in the small coastal town where Mateo had grown up. His father, Carlos Cruz, had been a man of few words but infinite patience, teaching his son that understanding came not from textbooks but from the accumulated wisdom of watching, listening, and caring about the work. The toolbox itself was a testament to that philosophy. Hand-forged wrenches sat alongside precision instruments, each tool chosen for its reliability rather than its appearance. The metal surfaces bore the patina of decades of honest work, and every scratch told a story of problems solved and systems restored. As the morning progressed, Mateo found himself thinking about Diego more than usual. His son would be finishing second grade in just a few weeks, and then summer vacation would begin. For the past 2 years, Mateo had managed to take time off for their annual camping trip to the beaches north of San Diego, tradition that had started as Maria's dying wish and had become the cornerstone of their father-son relationship. The memory of that conversation still came to him in quiet moments. Maria had been so weak by then, her voice barely above a whisper as she gripped his hand in the hospital bed. "Promise me something, Mateo," she had said, her eyes bright with fever but clear with purpose. "Promise me you'll take Diego to the beach every summer, not just for a day, really take him. Camp under the stars, teach him to fish, show him that there's more to life than work and responsibility." He had promised, of course, how could he not? But keeping that promise had proven more challenging than either of them had anticipated. The first year after Maria's death, grief had made everything difficult. The second year, Diego had been too young to really appreciate the adventure. This year, though, Diego was old enough to understand the significance of the trip, old enough to help set up the tent and build sandcastles and maybe even learn to surf. Mateo had been planning the trip for months. He'd researched campgrounds, bought new gear, and even taken Diego to a sporting goods store to pick out a sleeping bag with his favorite superhero on it. The boy's excitement had been infectious, and for the first time since Maria's death, Mateo had felt genuinely optimistic about the future. The only obstacle was getting the time off work. Vale Marine Services operated on a skeleton crew during the winter months, but summer brought a surge of activity as yacht owners prepared for the busy charter season. Mateo understood the business pressures, but he also understood the importance of keeping promises to 8-year-old boys who had already lost too much. His supervisor, Jim Hendricks, had been encouraging when Mateo mentioned the vacation request. "You've got more unused time than anyone in the department," Jim had said, "and Lord knows you've earned it. Just make sure you get it approved through the front office before the summer rush really hits." That front office meant Cassandra Vale, the CEO and owner of Vale Marine Services. In the 8 years Mateo had worked for the company, he'd seen her perhaps a dozen times, usually striding through the maintenance bays with an entourage of executives. Her attention focused on profit margins and operational efficiency rather than the people who actually did the work. Cassandra Vale was a woman who commanded attention without trying. At 42, she had built a marine services empire that catered to the ultra-wealthy, providing everything from routine maintenance to complete yacht refurbishments. Her business acumen was legendary in the industry, and her ability to anticipate market trends had made her one of the most successful entrepreneurs in Southern California. But success, Mateo had observed, seemed to come at a cost. The few times he'd seen her interact with employees, she'd been polite but distant, as if she was speaking to useful equipment rather than human beings. She drove a different luxury car each week, wore clothes that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and lived in a waterfront mansion that had been featured in architectural magazines. The contrast between her world and his couldn't have been starker. While she made decisions that affected hundreds of families, Mateo focused on the simple goal of getting home to Diego each evening with enough energy to help with homework and read bedtime stories. While she collected expensive art and traveled to exclusive resorts, Mateo's greatest luxury was the occasional movie night with his son, complete with microwave popcorn and Diego's running commentary on the plot. Yet despite their different circumstances, Mateo had always respected the fact that Cassandra had built something substantial. Vale Marine Services employed nearly 200 people, and the company's reputation for quality work had made it indispensable to yacht owners up and down the coast. Mateo took pride in being part of that reputation, even if his contributions were rarely acknowledged by management. The morning wore on with its usual rhythm of diagnostic challenges and repair work. Mateo lost himself in the familiar dance of troubleshooting, his hands moving with practiced precision as he traced electrical circuits and tested mechanical systems. It was meditative work, requiring just enough concentration to quiet the constant background worry about Diego's future and his own ability to provide for them both. Around noon, Roberto approached with news that would soon change everything. "Hey Teo, did you hear about the boss lady's new toy? They're bringing it in this afternoon for final systems check." Mateo looked up from the engine compartment where he'd been working. "New toy? $4 million yacht. Custom build, some kind of hybrid engine system. Word is she's planning to show it off to investors next week." Roberto's voice carried the mix of admiration and resentment that expensive toys often inspired among working people. "Must be nice to have that kind of money to throw around." "What kind of hybrid system?" Mateo asked, his professional curiosity overriding his personal feelings about wealth inequality. "Hydrogen fuel cell paired with a backup diesel engine. Supposed to be the future of yachting or something. Jim says it's got more computers than a spaceship." Mateo nodded thoughtfully. He'd been reading about hydrogen fuel cell technology in his spare time, fascinated by the engineering challenges involved in making such systems reliable in marine environments. The technology was promising but notoriously finicky, requiring precise calibration and constant monitoring to prevent cascade failures. "Who's doing the final inspection?" he asked. "Jim's putting together a team. He mentioned you might be involved if they run into any technical issues." The afternoon brought the arrival of Cassandra's yacht, a sleek 70-foot vessel that looked more like a modern sculpture than a traditional boat. Its hull was painted in deep blue that seemed to shift color depending on the angle of the light, and its clean lines suggested both power and elegance. As the yacht was guided into the maintenance bay, Mateo couldn't help but admire the craftsmanship. Every detail spoke of meticulous engineering and unlimited budget. The hybrid propulsion system hummed quietly, a whisper of advanced technology that promised to revolutionize the industry. But as he watched the initial inspection, Mateo noticed something that made him frown. The system integration appeared rushed, with several key components showing signs of hasty installation. The cooling lines for the fuel cell stack were slightly misaligned, and the backup diesel engine's exhaust system had been modified in a way that might cause problems under stress. He made a mental note to mention these observations to Jim, but his attention was soon distracted by more immediate concerns. The afternoon was wearing on, and he still needed to submit his vacation request. The summer rush was indeed approaching, and every day of delay made approval less likely. As 5 o'clock approached, Mateo cleaned his tools and prepared for the conversation that would determine whether he could keep his promise to Diego. The request form was already filled out, asking for 1 week off in early July, just enough time for a proper camping trip to the beaches they'd visited with Maria years ago. Walking toward the administrative offices, Mateo reflected on the irony of his situation. He spent his days maintaining vessels that cost more than he would earn in a lifetime, ensuring that wealthy families could enjoy their leisure time without mechanical worries. Yet when it came to his own family's modest needs, he found himself having to beg for basic consideration. The administrative wing of Vale Marine Services was a different world from the maintenance bays. Polished marble floors replaced concrete, and the air smelled of expensive perfume rather than diesel fuel. Abstract paintings adorned the walls, their price tags probably exceeding Mateo's annual salary. Cassandra Vale's office occupied the corner of the building, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the harbor. As Mateo approached, he could see her through the glass, bent over a stack of documents with the focused intensity of someone who measured time in profit margins rather than heartbeats. He knocked softly on the doorframe and waited for permission to enter. This would be the moment that determined whether he could keep his promise to Maria and Diego, or whether the demands of business would once again take precedence over the simple human need for family time. The conversation that followed would set in motion a chain of events that neither Mateo nor Cassandra could have predicted, transforming both their lives in ways that would echo far beyond the confines of 1 week's vacation request. The vacation request form felt heavier than it should have in Mateo's weathered hands as he stood outside Cassandra Vale's office. The single sheet of paper represented months of planning, weeks of Diego's excited chatter about sleeping bags and campfires, and the sacred promise he'd made to Maria in her final days. He'd filled out the form with careful precision, requesting July 7th through 14th own week that would mean everything to an 8-year-old boy who'd already endured too much loss. Through the glass partition, he could see Cassandra hunched over her mahogany desk, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her no-nonsense expression. Designer glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed what appeared to be financial reports, her manicured fingers moving rapidly across a tablet screen. The office around her spoke of success and control, leather furniture that cost more than most people's cars, abstract art that suggested sophistication without warmth, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the harbor she owned. Mateo knocked gently on the doorframe, the sound barely audible over the hum of the air-conditioning system. Cassandra looked up with the practiced efficiency of someone who measured interruptions in lost revenue. "Yes?" Her voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Ms. Vale, I'm Mateo Cruz from the maintenance department. I have a vacation request that needs your approval." He stepped into the office, suddenly aware of his work clothes and the faint scent of diesel fuel that seemed to cling to him despite his best efforts. Cassandra's eyes flicked to the form in his hands, then back to her tablet. "Submitted through HR. They handle vacation requests." "I did, ma'am. HR said all vacation requests during peak season need your personal approval." Mateo's voice remained steady, though his heart was beating faster than usual. She sighed, the sound carrying the weight of someone perpetually burdened by other people's needs. "Peak season starts in 2 weeks. We can't afford to lose anyone from the technical staff." "It's just 1 week, Ms. Vale. I haven't taken any vacation time in almost 2 years. He extended the form toward her desk. Without looking up from her tablet, Cassandra waved the paper away. "Request denied. We have 3 major yacht deliveries scheduled for July, and the summer charter season is our busiest period. One absent technician could cost us thousands in delays." The words hit Mateo like a physical blow. He'd expected resistance, but not outright dismissal without even a glance at the specific dates. "Ms. Vale, if I could just explain." "There's nothing to explain." She finally looked up, her blue eyes cold and calculating. "You're a maintenance worker. Maintenance workers don't take vacations during peak season. It's basic business sense." "I'm not just a maintenance worker," Mateo said quietly, surprised by his own boldness. "I'm the senior marine technician. I've been here 8 years, and I've never let the company down." "Then don't start now." Cassandra's attention had already returned to her tablet. "Peak season ends in September. Submit your request then." The casual dismissal stung worse than anger would have. Mateo stood there for a moment, watching this woman who earned more in a day than he made in a year, who lived in a world where other people's promises to their children were merely inconveniences to be managed. "Ms. Vale," he said, his voice carrying a note of desperation he immediately regretted. "This isn't just any vacation. I promised my late wife I'd take our son camping every summer. It's the only tradition we have left." For a brief moment, something flickered across Cassandra's face, perhaps a shadow of recognition that she was dealing with a human being rather than a personnel issue. But it passed quickly, replaced by the armor of professional detachment she wore, like expensive perfume. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, her tone suggesting she was anything but sorry. "But personal situations don't change business realities. The company has obligations to our clients. And I have obligations to my son." The words came out sharper than Mateo intended. Cassandra's eyes narrowed, and for the first time in the conversation, she gave him her full attention. "Mr. Cruz, is it? Let me be very clear about something. This company employs nearly 200 people. If I started making exceptions for every personal situation, we'd have no operational capacity. Your job is to maintain our equipment. My job is to run a profitable business. Those roles don't overlap." "I understand business pressure," Mateo said, struggling to keep his voice level. "But I'm asking for 1 week. 1 week in 8 years. 1 week during our most critical period. Cassandra stood up, her 5'6" frame somehow projecting authority across the spacious office. Do you know what happens if we delay a delivery to a client who's paying us $50,000 for a charter? They go to our competitors, and when they go to our competitors, we lose revenue. When we lose revenue, we can't afford to keep employees. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Mateo felt the familiar weight of economic vulnerability, the knowledge that his family's security depended on the whims of someone who would never understand what it meant to choose between rent and groceries. Miss Vale, I've never asked for anything before. I work overtime when you need it. I come in on weekends. I've solved problems that your factory specialists couldn't handle. I'm just asking for 1 week to keep a promise to my son. And I'm telling you that your promise is not my responsibility. Cassandra's voice had turned arctic. You're paid to solve problems, not create them. Taking vacation during peak season creates problems. The finality in her tone was unmistakable. Mateo looked down at the vacation request form, still clutched in his hands, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. Not anger, exactly, but a cold clarity about the nature of the relationship between labor and capital, between those who worked with their hands and those who worked with numbers. Is that your final decision? He asked. It is. Cassandra had already returned to her tablet, dismissing him with the casual cruelty of someone who had never doubted her own importance. Mateo folded the vacation request form carefully and placed it in his shirt pocket. Thank you for your time, Miss Vale. He turned to leave, but paused at the threshold. I hope you never have to explain to your child why you couldn't keep a promise because someone else's money was more important. If Cassandra heard him, she gave no indication. Her attention remained fixed on her tablet, her world of profit margins and operational efficiency untroubled by the human cost of her decisions. Walking back through the administrative wing, Mateo felt the weight of failure settling on his shoulders. The polished marble floors seemed to mock him with their pristine perfection, a reminder of the vast gulf between his world and hers. How would he explain this to Diego? How could he tell an 8-year-old boy that the camping trip they'd planned for months was cancelled because his father wasn't important enough to matter? The maintenance bay felt different when he returned, the familiar sounds of repair work now carrying an undertone of futility. Roberto looked up from the engine he was working on, his expression hopeful. How'd it go with the boss lady? Denied, Mateo said simply. Just like that? No discussion? Just like that. Mateo retrieved his toolbox from the workbench, his hands moving with automatic precision. Peak season is more important than promises to 8-year-old boys. Roberto whistled low. That's cold, man. What are you going to tell Diego? It was the question Mateo had been dreading. I don't know. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of routine maintenance tasks. But Mateo's heart wasn't in his work. Every tool he picked up reminded him of the generations of craftsmen who had believed that honest work would be rewarded with basic human dignity. His father had worked 50 years as a marine mechanic, never becoming wealthy, but always able to provide for his family and maintain his self-respect. Now, in this age of corporate efficiency and maximized profits, it seemed that respect was a luxury that working people could no longer afford. As 5 o'clock approached, Mateo gathered his tools and prepared for the conversation he dreaded most. Diego would be waiting at home, probably with his new sleeping bag spread out on his bedroom floor, practicing for the camping trip that would never happen. The drive home felt longer than usual, each traffic light giving him more time to rehearse explanations that sounded hollow even to himself. How do you tell a child that the adult world operates on principles that would be considered cruel in any playground? How do you explain that some people's time is worth more than other people's promises? The small apartment he shared with Diego felt both welcoming and confining when he opened the door. Diego's drawings covered the refrigerator, including a recent masterpiece depicting the two of them sitting by a campfire under a starry sky. The boy himself was at the kitchen table, working on homework with the focused intensity he'd inherited from his father. "Dad!" Diego looked up with a smile that never failed to lift Mateo's spirits. I finished my math homework, and Mrs. Peterson said we only have 3 more days of school. Are you excited about our camping trip? Mateo set down his toolbox and knelt beside his son's chair, knowing that the next few minutes would change something fundamental between them. Not their love that would endure, but Diego's understanding of how the world worked and whether promises could be trusted. Diego, we need to talk about the camping trip. The boy's smile faltered as he read the expression on his father's face. What's wrong? I'm sorry, son. I couldn't get the time off work. We're going to have to postpone the trip. The silence that followed was worse than any tantrum would have been. Diego's dark eyes, so much like his mother's, filled with tears that he tried desperately to hold back. But you promised, he whispered. I know, Diego. I know I promised, and I'm so sorry. Mom said promises are sacred. You told me that. The words cut deeper than any corporate rejection ever could. Mateo pulled his son into his arms, feeling the boy's small body shake with disappointment and confusion. Sometimes, Diego, the world doesn't work the way it should. Sometimes people who have power don't care about the people who don't. It was too much wisdom for an 8-year-old to bear, but it was the truth. And if Mateo had learned anything from losing Maria, it was that protecting children from difficult truths didn't make those truths disappear. As he held his son and felt the weight of his broken promise, Mateo couldn't have imagined that within days, the woman who had so casually dismissed his request would be desperately seeking his help. He couldn't have known that Cassandra Vale's world of profit margins and operational efficiency was about to collide with the unforgiving reality of mechanical failure and human expertise. The vacation request form remained in his shirt pocket, a reminder of the moment when 2 worlds had met and found no common ground. But sometimes, life has a way of creating second chances from the most unexpected circumstances. Diego's hand-drawn map lay spread across the kitchen table like a testament to childhood optimism, its crayon-colored routes and carefully labeled landmarks now mocking the promises that would never be kept. The 8-year-old had spent hours creating his masterpiece, complete with a winding path from their apartment to the coastal campgrounds. Stars drawn in bright yellow to represent the nights they would spend under the open sky, and stick figures of father and son roasting marshmallows over an orange and red campfire. "Can I keep it on the refrigerator?" Diego asked, his voice smaller than usual as he traced one of the drawn pathways with his finger. Mateo's throat tightened as he looked at the innocent artwork. Every detail spoke of anticipation and trust: the carefully drawn tent, the smiling faces, the beach where they were supposed to build sandcastles and teach Diego to surf. It was the visual representation of a promise broken not by his choice, but by the cold calculations of a woman who had never learned that some things mattered more than money. "Of course you can, Mijo," Mateo said, using the endearment that always made Diego smile. "It's beautiful work." But the boy's enthusiasm had dimmed considerably since their conversation the night before. He'd accepted the cancellation with the stoic resilience that children develop when disappointment becomes familiar. But the hurt in his dark eyes was unmistakable. This was supposed to be their special time, the annual tradition that connected him to his mother's memory and his father's love. "Maybe we can go to the beach for just 1 day," Diego suggested with forced brightness. "Like on a Saturday?" "Maybe," Mateo agreed, though they both knew it wouldn't be the same. A day trip couldn't capture the magic of sleeping under the stars, waking up to the sound of waves, and having uninterrupted time to talk about everything and nothing. It couldn't replicate the sense of adventure that Maria had wanted them to share, the escape from routine that would create lasting memories. The drive to work felt heavier than usual, weighted down by the knowledge that he'd have to face another day of maintaining luxury vessels for people who could afford to take vacations whenever they pleased. The irony wasn't lost on him. He spent his days ensuring that wealthy families could enjoy their leisure time, while his own family's modest dreams were dismissed as irrelevant. At Vale Marine Services, the rhythm of work continued as if nothing had changed. Boats needed maintenance, systems required troubleshooting, and the approaching summer season demanded preparation. But Mateo found it difficult to summon his usual enthusiasm for the work. Each task felt mechanical, devoid of the satisfaction he'd once found in solving complex problems. Roberto noticed the change immediately. "You're quiet today, hermano. Still thinking about that vacation thing?" "I keep thinking about my son's face when I told him we couldn't go," Mateo said, adjusting a fuel line connection with perhaps more force than necessary. "He drew this map of our camping route. Took him hours. Now it's just going to sit on the refrigerator as a reminder of what we couldn't do." "That's harsh, man. The boss lady couldn't make an exception for 1 week. She made it very clear that my personal situation isn't her concern." Mateo's voice carried a bitterness that was unusual for him. "According to her, I'm just a maintenance worker who should know better than to ask for time off during peak season." The conversation was interrupted by Jim Hendricks, their supervisor, who approached with the purposeful stride of someone carrying important news. "Teo, I need you to take a look at the new yacht, the boss's personal vessel. The initial systems check revealed some irregularities." Mateo set down his tools and followed Jim toward the slip where Cassandra's $4 million yacht waited. Up close, the vessel was even more impressive than it had appeared from a distance. The hull's deep blue finish seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and the clean lines suggested both power and elegance. But as Mateo's trained eye examined the technical specifications, he began to notice troubling details. "What kind of irregularities?" he asked. "The hybrid system isn't integrating properly with the navigation computers. The fuel cell stack is showing intermittent power fluctuations, and the backup diesel engine has been running hotter than normal." Jim's expression was serious. "The factory technicians spent 3 hours on it yesterday and couldn't isolate the problem." Mateo climbed aboard and made his way to the engine compartment. The hybrid propulsion system was indeed a marvel of modern engineering, a hydrogen fuel cell paired with a conventional diesel engine designed to provide both efficiency and reliability. But as he examined the installation, several concerns became apparent. The fuel cell cooling system had been modified from the original specifications, presumably to save space or reduce costs. The connections between the hydrogen storage tanks and the fuel cell stack showed signs of hasty assembly, with some joints that would likely develop leaks under pressure. Most concerning was the integration between the fuel cell management system and the boat's main electrical grid. It appeared to have been designed by committee, with multiple engineers making changes without considering the overall system architecture. "This is going to be a problem," Mateo said, running his hands along the cooling lines. "The fuel cell stack needs precise temperature control, but this cooling system isn't adequate for sustained operation. And these electrical connections, they're not following proper marine standards." "Can you fix it?" Jim asked. "I can make it work for now, but it's going to require constant monitoring. This isn't a system you can just turn on and forget about." Mateo pulled out his diagnostic tools and began testing various components. "Who did the integration work?" "Multiple contractors, from what I understand. The boss wanted it done fast, and she had different specialists working on different systems." That explained the lack of coordination. Mateo had seen this before: complex projects, where timeline pressures and cost considerations led to compromises that created long-term problems. The individual components were high quality, but they hadn't been properly integrated into a cohesive system. As he worked, Mateo found himself thinking about the contrast between this yacht and the simple camping trip he'd been denied. Cassandra Vale could spend $4 million on a boat she'd probably use a few times a year, but she couldn't spare one employee for a week to honor a promise to a grieving child. The mathematics of privilege had never been so stark. "The fuel cell management system needs to be recalibrated," he told Jim after completing his initial assessment. "And someone needs to redesign the cooling circuit before this boat spends any serious time on the water. The current setup might work for short trips, but it's not suitable for extended operation." "How long will the recalibration take?" "A few hours, if I can get access to the right software." Mateo was already mentally organizing the steps required. "But Jim, You need to understand, this is a temporary fix. The fundamental design issues need to be addressed by someone with authority to make major changes. I'll pass that up the chain. For now, just get it running reliably. As Mateo began the delicate process of recalibrating the fuel cell management system, he reflected on the irony of the situation. Here he was, using his expertise to perfect a luxury toy for the woman who had casually dismissed his family's needs. The yacht would probably see more maintenance attention in a month than he'd received in 8 years of loyal service. The work required intense concentration, but it also provided a temporary escape from his disappointment. There was something satisfying about solving complex technical problems, about bringing order to chaos through knowledge and skill. Even if the beneficiary was someone he'd lost all respect for, the work itself retained its inherent value. By late afternoon, Mateo had managed to stabilize the fuel cell system and reduce the operating temperature of the diesel engine. The yacht purred quietly at its mooring, its hybrid propulsion system finally operating within acceptable parameters. But as he cleaned his tools and prepared to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just applied a bandage to a more serious wound. The drive home gave him time to think about the larger implications of what he'd observed. The yacht's problems weren't isolated incidents, they were symptoms of a broader pattern of corner-cutting and rushed timelines that prioritized appearance over substance. How many other vessels in the Vale Marine Services fleet suffered from similar issues? How many clients were unknowingly taking risks because someone had decided that proper engineering took too long or cost too much? Diego was waiting for him at the kitchen table again, this time with a different project. Instead of homework, he was working on what appeared to be a letter, his tongue sticking out slightly as he concentrated on forming each letter carefully. "What are you writing, Mijo?" Mateo asked, hanging his work jacket on the back of a chair. "A letter to your boss." Diego said seriously, "I want to ask her if I can work at her company for the week you were supposed to be off. Then you wouldn't be short-handed, and we could still go camping." The innocent proposal broke Mateo's heart. Here was his 8-year-old son trying to solve an adult problem with the pure logic of childhood. If manpower was the issue, then he would volunteer to help. It was the kind of thinking that made perfect sense until you considered the realities of labor laws, insurance regulations, and the fundamental truth that Cassandra Vale's refusal had nothing to do with actual operational needs. "Diego, that's very thoughtful of you, but kids can't work at companies. There are rules about that." "Then why did she say you couldn't take time off because they needed workers?" It was a fair question, and one that highlighted the fundamental dishonesty of Cassandra's position. The company wasn't actually short-staffed, they were just unwilling to make temporary adjustments to accommodate their employees' lives. But explaining the nuances of corporate power dynamics to an 8-year-old felt like destroying what remained of his innocence. "Sometimes, Diego, people say things that sound reasonable but aren't really true. Your boss didn't want to let me take time off, so she found a reason that sounded good." "That's lying." "Yes, Mijo, it is." Diego continued working on his letter, his childish handwriting, forming words that would never be sent. But the gesture represented something importanter, refusal to accept that the world had to be unfair, a belief that reasonable people could find reasonable solutions if they just tried hard enough. As Mateo watched his son work, he felt a renewed sense of determination. Maybe the camping trip was cancelled, but that didn't mean the promise to Maria had to be broken permanently. There had to be other ways to create the kind of memories she'd wanted them to share, other opportunities to show Diego that some things mattered more than money or corporate convenience. The hand-drawn map still hung on the refrigerator, its bright colors a reminder of dreams deferred but not abandoned. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Mateo couldn't shake the feeling that his assessment of Cassandra's yacht would prove to be more prophetic than he'd imagined. Technical problems had a way of surfacing at the worst possible times, and systems that looked perfect on paper often failed when subjected to real-world stress. For now, though, he focused on the present-moment dinner with his son, help with homework, and the quiet satisfaction of another day's honest work completed. The camping trip might be cancelled, but the promise to Maria lived on in every small act of love and attention he showed their son. That was something no corporate executive could take away, no matter how much power they wielded or how little they cared about the people who made their success possible. Maria's journal lay open on the kitchen table, its leather cover worn soft from years of handling. Mateo had discovered it while searching for Diego's birth certificate, tucked away in the shoebox where he kept important documents and memories from their life together. The pages were filled with her careful handwriting, documenting everything from daily observations to profound reflections on motherhood and love. He hadn't intended to read it. The journal felt too private, too sacred to violate even in her absence. But one passage, written in the shaky handwriting of her final weeks, had caught his attention and refused to let go. "I worry about what will happen to Mateo and Diego when I'm gone. They're so much alike, both of them carry their emotions deep inside. Both of them need time to process the world around them. I hope Mateo remembers that healing happens in quiet moments, in shared experiences that don't require words. The camping trips we used to take before I got sick, those were when Diego was most himself, when Mateo could step away from his responsibilities and just be a father. Please, God, let them find their way back to those moments." The words had been written 3 months before her death, when she was still lucid enough to plan for a future she wouldn't see. Below that entry, in even shakier handwriting, she'd added, "I made Mateo promise about the camping trips. Not because I think nature has magical healing properties, but because I know they both need permission to be vulnerable together. In our everyday lives, they're both so focused on being strong for each other that they forget to be human. Under the stars, away from work and school, and all the things that remind them of loss, maybe they can remember how to laugh together." Mateo closed the journal gently, feeling the weight of understanding that came too late. The camping trips weren't just about keeping a promise. They were about creating space for grief to transform into something bearable, for a father and son to rediscover their connection beyond the daily routine of survival. Diego appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed in his school clothes, but moving with the reluctant energy of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "Dad, do I have to go to school today?" "Of course you do, Mijo. Why would you ask that?" "Because Jimmy's mom is taking him to Disneyland today, and Melissa gets to go to her grandmother's house in Arizona for 2 weeks, and Tyler's family is going camping in Yellowstone." Diego's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone children use when stating obvious injustices. "Everyone gets to do fun things with their families except us." The comparison stung because it was partially true. Around them, other families were making summer plans, booking vacations, and creating the kind of memories that would last a lifetime. Meanwhile, Mateo was working double shifts to maintain the luxury vehicles that would take those families on their adventures. "We'll do something special too, Diego. Just because we can't go camping right now doesn't mean we can't have fun together." "Like what?" It was a fair question, and one that highlighted the limitations of their situation. Without the time off he'd requested, Mateo's options were limited to evenings and weekends. They could go to the beach for a day, visit the zoo, or catch a movie, all worthwhile activities, but nothing that approached the significance of the camping tradition Maria had wanted them to maintain. "We'll figure something out," Mateo said, knowing the answer was inadequate but unable to offer anything more concrete. At work, the atmosphere seemed different. Word had spread about Mateo's denied vacation request, and his colleagues were treating him with the careful sympathy usually reserved for someone dealing with a family tragedy. In a sense, that's exactly what it was. The death of a promise, the burial of a tradition that had been meant to honor Maria's memory. "Any word from upstairs about your situation?" Roberto asked as they worked side by side on a routine maintenance check. "Nothing's going to change," Mateo replied. "The decision's been made." "That's messed up, man. You're the best mechanic we have. They should be bending over backwards to keep you happy." "I'm not asking them to bend over backwards. I'm asking for 1 week off after 8 years of service. That's not unreasonable." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another yacht, this one belonging to the Hendricks family regular clients who brought their vessel in for monthly maintenance. As Mateo performed the routine checks, He found himself listening to the family's conversation about their upcoming cruise to the Mediterranean. "The kids are so excited," Mrs. Hendricks was saying to her husband. "Sarah's been planning what she wants to see in Rome for months." "It'll be good for them to experience different cultures," Mr. Hendricks replied. "Travel broadens the mind." Mateo continued his work, trying not to think about the fact that this family's vacation would cost more than he earned in 2 years. The yacht's fuel bill alone would probably exceed his monthly salary. Yet somehow, his request for unpaid time off was considered an unreasonable burden on the company. As the morning progressed, Mateo noticed increased activity around Cassandra's yacht. Several technicians were running diagnostic tests, and he could see Jim Hendricks in animated conversation with what appeared to be factory representatives. The hybrid propulsion system was clearly still causing problems. "Hey, Teo," Jim called out. "Can you take another look at the fuel cell system? We're getting some weird readings." Mateo set aside his current work and made his way to the yacht. The symptoms were immediately apparent. The fuel cell stack was running hotter than normal, and the cooling system was struggling to maintain proper temperature. The temporary fixes he'd implemented were holding, but barely. "How long has it been running like this?" he asked. "Since yesterday evening. The boss wanted to test it for extended operation, so we've been running it for 12-hour cycles." That explained the problem. The cooling system Mateo had identified as inadequate was now being stressed beyond its capabilities. The fuel cell stack was generating more heat than the compromised cooling circuit could dissipate, creating a dangerous feedback loop that would eventually lead to system failure. "You need to shut it down," Mateo said firmly. "This cooling system isn't designed for sustained operation. If you keep running it like this, you're going to damage the fuel cell stack. The boss wants it ready for the investor presentation next week. She's planning to take them out for a demonstration cruise. Then she needs to understand that this system has serious limitations. I can keep it running for short periods, but it's not suitable for extended use without major modifications." Jim's expression was troubled. "What kind of modifications?" "Complete redesign of the cooling circuit. Probably need to replace the heat exchangers and upgrade the circulation pumps. It's not a small job." "How long would that take?" "With the right parts and authorization, maybe 2 weeks, but that's assuming we can get components on short notice." The timeline was clearly unacceptable. Jim ran his hands through his hair, the gesture of someone caught between impossible demands and physical reality. "Can you make it work for 1 more week, just until after the presentation?" Mateo considered the request carefully. The systems were operating at the edge of their capabilities, but with constant monitoring and careful management, they might survive a few more days. It would require someone with deep understanding of the hybrid technology to babysit the systems, adjusting parameters and watching for signs of impending failure. "I can try," he said finally, "but someone needs to stay with it constantly. These systems are too unstable to run unattended." "Would you be willing to do that? We'd pay overtime, of course." The irony wasn't lost on Mateo. The company couldn't spare him for 1 week of vacation, but they needed him to work extra hours to keep their most expensive asset functioning. He thought about declining, about letting Cassandra Vale deal with the consequences of her cost-cutting decisions. But his professional pride wouldn't allow him to deliberately sabotage equipment, regardless of his personal feelings about the owner. "I'll do it," he said. "But I want it on record that this is a temporary solution. These systems need proper engineering attention before they can be considered safe for regular operation." As he began the process of fine-tuning the hybrid propulsion system, Mateo reflected on the broader implications of what he was seeing. The yacht's problems weren't unique. They were symptomatic of an industry-wide trend toward cutting corners and prioritizing appearance over substance. How many other vessels were operating with similar compromises? How many families were unknowingly at risk because someone had decided that proper engineering was too expensive or time-consuming? The work was demanding, requiring constant attention to multiple systems and their complex interactions, but it also provided a distraction from his disappointment about the camping trip. There was something satisfying about solving problems, about bringing order to chaos through knowledge and skill. By evening, Mateo had managed to stabilize the systems enough to allow for limited operation. The yacht could run for short periods without immediate danger, but it would require constant monitoring and frequent adjustments. It was the kind of high-maintenance solution that worked in the short term, but created long-term problems. The drive home gave him time to think about the larger patterns he was observing. The yacht's problems, the denied vacation request, the industry's focus on profit over people, they were all connected, all symptoms of a system that prioritized short-term gains over long-term sustainability. Diego was waiting for him at the kitchen table again, this time with a different project. He'd been working on a photo album, carefully arranging pictures of their family's happier times. Maria smiled out from dozens of snapshots holding Diego as a baby, laughing at a beach picnic, helping him with a school project. "I thought we could look at pictures of Mom together," Diego said softly, "since we can't go camping where she wanted us to go." The suggestion was both heartbreaking and healing. Mateo sat down beside his son and began turning the pages, each photograph telling a story of love and loss and the enduring bonds that connect families across time and space. "She would be proud of how strong you're being," Mateo said, his arm around Diego's shoulders. "Do you think she knows about the camping trip?" "I think she knows we're trying to honor her memory in whatever way we can. The camping trip was just one way to do that. There are others." They spent the next hour looking through photographs and sharing memories. It wasn't the same as sleeping under the stars, but it was a different kind of intimacy, quieter, more reflective, but no less meaningful. As they prepared for bed, Mateo felt a renewed sense of determination. The camping trip might be cancelled, but the promise to Maria lived on in every moment of connection with their son. That was something no corporate executive could take away, no matter how much power they wielded or how little they understood about the things that truly mattered. The journal remained open on the kitchen table, Maria's words serving as both inspiration and reminder. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to honor her memory and keep her dreams alive. The camping trip was just one destination on a longer journey toward healing and hope. The yacht's original blueprint spread across Mateo's workbench like a technical prophecy, its precise lines and detailed specifications telling the story of what should have been rather than what actually was. The schematic showed the hybrid propulsion system as it had been designed by the original engineer's marvel of integration, where hydrogen fuel cells and diesel engines worked in perfect harmony, supported by cooling systems that could handle sustained operation and electrical networks that followed proper marine safety standards. Reality, as Mateo had learned over the past 3 days, was far different from the blueprint's pristine vision. The actual installation bore only passing resemblance to the original design, with modifications and shortcuts that compromised both efficiency and safety. Someone had decided that engineering excellence was less important than meeting deadlines and controlling costs. "The fuel cell management system is showing stress indicators again," Roberta reported, checking the diagnostic display. "Temperatures creeping up toward the red zone." Mateo wiped his hands on a shop rag and moved to the control panel. The numbers confirmed what he'd feared: the jury-rigged cooling system was losing its battle against the heat generated by the fuel cell stack. They were operating on borrowed time, each hour of operation, bringing them closer to a catastrophic failure that would leave Cassandra's prized yacht dead in the water. "Reduce power to 70%, he instructed, "and increase the cooling flow rate. We need to buy ourselves some time." "How much longer can we keep this up?" "Maybe a few more days if we're careful, but this system is fundamentally flawed. It's like trying to run a marathon with a sprained ankle. You might make it to the finish line, but you're going to do permanent damage in the process." The analogy was more apt than Mateo realized. The yacht's problems weren't just mechanical, they were symptomatic of a deeper issue with how Vale Marine Services operated. The same cost-cutting mentality that had led to the yacht's compromised systems had also created the workplace culture that treated employees as expendable resources rather than valuable human beings. As the morning progressed, Mateo found himself thinking about the conversation he'd had with Diego the night before. His son had been working on a school project about careers, and when asked what his father did for work, Diego had written, "My dad fixes boats for rich people who don't know how to say thank you." The innocent observation had stung because it was essentially accurate. Mateo spent his days maintaining vessels worth more than most people's homes, ensuring that wealthy families could enjoy their leisure time without mechanical interruptions. Yet his own family's modest needs were dismissed as irrelevant inconveniences. "Teo, can you come look at this?" Jim Hendricks called from the yacht's navigation station. "We're getting some weird readings from the electrical system." Mateo made his way to the helm, where multiple warning lights were flashing in what appeared to be a random pattern. The electrical system was clearly struggling, but the symptoms didn't match any standard diagnostic pattern he'd seen before. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. "Started about an hour ago. The factory tech said it might be related to the fuel cell integration, but he couldn't pinpoint the exact cause." Mateo pulled out his handheld oscilloscope and began testing various circuits. The readings were troubling voltage fluctuations that suggested the electrical system was unstable, power spikes that could damage sensitive electronics, and ground faults that posed potential safety hazards. "This is what happens when you try to integrate complex systems without proper engineering oversight," he said, more to himself than to Jim. "The fuel cell management system is sending conflicting signals to the main electrical grid. Can you fix it?" "I can isolate the problem circuits and create workarounds, but it's going to make the system even more unstable. Every fix creates new vulnerabilities." As Mateo worked, he couldn't help but think about the broader implications of what he was seeing. The yacht represented everything that was wrong with the modern marine industry: focus on impressive specifications and cutting-edge technology, but without the fundamental engineering discipline required to make those systems work reliably. The original blueprint had been created by engineers who understood the complexities of marine propulsion. Every component had been carefully selected and positioned to work in harmony with the others. The cooling systems were designed with generous capacity margins to handle unexpected stress. The electrical systems followed proven safety protocols developed over decades of marine experience. But somewhere in the transition from blueprint to reality, those careful considerations had been sacrificed to timeline pressures and cost constraints. The result was a technological marvel that looked impressive on paper, but was fundamentally unreliable in practice. "The electrical problems are getting worse," Mateo told Jim after completing his assessment. "I can create temporary fixes, but each one makes the overall system more fragile. It's like trying to repair a spider web-every patch puts more stress on the remaining structure. What would it take to fix it properly?" "Complete rewiring of the electrical integration. Probably need to replace the fuel cell management controllers and redesign the power distribution system. It's essentially a full rebuild of the yacht's electrical infrastructure." Jim's expression was grim. "That's not going to happen before the investor presentation." "Then you need to understand that this yacht is operating with significant safety risks. The electrical system is unstable, the cooling system is inadequate, and the fuel cell management system is unreliable. One component failure could cascade into a complete system breakdown." "But it'll run for the presentation." "It might, but I wouldn't want to be responsible for what happens if something goes wrong during the demonstration." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Cassandra Vale herself, accompanied by a group of men in expensive suits who were clearly the investors she was hoping to impress. Even from a distance, Mateo could see the confidence in her posture, the certainty of someone who had never doubted her own success. "That's quite a vessel," one of the investors was saying. "The hybrid propulsion technology is really the future of the industry." "It's a game changer," Cassandra replied. "Zero emissions for harbor operations, extended range for open water cruising, and whisper, quiet running. Our clients are going to love the environmental benefits." Mateo watched the group approach the yacht, knowing that they were about to board a vessel that looked perfect on the surface but was fundamentally flawed underneath. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was the only person present who truly understood the yacht's limitations, yet he was also the person whose concerns had been most thoroughly dismissed. "The system specifications are impressive," another investor noted, reading from a tablet. "Fuel cell efficiency ratings are better than anything currently on the market." "Those are laboratory ratings," Mateo muttered to Roberto. "Real-world performance is going to be very different." As the group boarded the yacht, Mateo found himself in the uncomfortable position of watching potential investors make decisions based on incomplete information. They were seeing the yacht's impressive specifications and elegant design, but they had no idea about the compromises and shortcuts that had been made during construction. Cassandra was in her element, explaining the technical features with the smooth confidence of someone who had memorized the marketing materials. She spoke about fuel cell efficiency, environmental benefits, and revolutionary design, as if she had personally engineered every component. "The hybrid system provides unlimited range," she was saying. "The fuel cells handle low-speed operations and harbor maneuvering, while the diesel engines provide power for high-speed cruising. It's the best of both worlds." "What about maintenance requirements?" one of the investors asked. "Minimal," Cassandra replied without hesitation. "The fuel cell technology is essentially maintenance-free, and the diesel engines use standard marine service protocols. Our technicians can handle routine maintenance at any marina." Mateo clenched his fists at the blatant misrepresentation. The fuel cell system required specialized knowledge and constant monitoring. The electrical integration was so complex that most technicians wouldn't know where to begin troubleshooting. The cooling system needed daily attention to prevent overheating. But he remained silent, watching the demonstration proceed with the same detached professionalism he'd maintained throughout his career. It wasn't his job to educate investors about the yacht's limitations. His job was to keep the systems running long enough for the presentation to succeed. The tour continued for another hour, with Cassandra highlighting features and capabilities that existed more in theory than in practice. The investors seemed impressed by the yacht's appearance and the confident presentation, but Mateo knew that none of them had the technical knowledge to ask the right questions. As the group prepared to leave, one of the investors made a comment that stopped Mateo cold. "We're particularly impressed by the safety record. Marine propulsion systems need to be absolutely reliable." "Our safety standards are uncompromising," Cassandra replied. "Every system is tested to the highest marine specifications." The casual lie was breathtaking in its audacity. Mateo knew that the yacht's safety record was non-existent. It had never been properly tested under real-world conditions. The electrical system was unstable, the cooling system was inadequate, and the fuel cell management system was unreliable. Yet Cassandra was representing it as a proven, safe technology. After the investors left, Mateo found himself staring at the yacht's blueprint again, its precise lines now seeming like a monument to abandoned principles. The original engineers had created something beautiful and functional, but their vision had been corrupted by the same mentality that treated employees as expendable resources. The yacht was a metaphor for everything wrong with the modern economy, impressive on the surface, but fundamentally unsustainable underneath. It represented the triumph of appearance over substance, of short-term thinking over long-term planning, of profit over people. As he rolled up the blueprint and prepared to continue his monitoring duties, Mateo reflected on the strange irony of his situation. He was the only person who truly understood the yacht's problems, yet he was also the person whose expertise was most taken for granted. His knowledge was essential to keeping the systems running, but his opinions about their fundamental flaws were dismissed as irrelevant. The camping trip he'd been denied would have cost the company nothing. His salary would have been saved, and the work could have been covered by other technicians. But the yacht's problems were costing thousands of dollars in overtime, specialized equipment, and constant monitoring. The mathematics of corporate decision-making had never been more absurd. The afternoon passed in a blur of system adjustments and diagnostic checks. The yacht continued to operate, but each hour brought new challenges and new evidence of the fundamental design flaws that no amount of skilled maintenance could overcome. Mateo found himself in the strange position of being both the yacht's savior and its most knowledgeable critic, keeping it running while knowing that its problems were essentially unsolvable. As evening approached, he began to suspect that the yacht's day of reckoning was approaching faster than anyone realized. The systems were operating at their limits, held together by expertise and determination rather than sound engineering. It was only a matter of time before something gave way, and when it did, the consequences would be far more serious than a cancelled camping trip. The investor presentation slides glowed on Cassandra's laptop screen, each page a carefully crafted promise of technological revolution and unprecedented returns. Charts showed projected growth rates that would make early investors wealthy, while photographs of the yacht emphasized its sleek design and cutting-edge features. The presentation was a masterpiece of corporate salesmanship, designed to convince sophisticated investors that they were looking at the future of marine propulsion technology. But as Mateo watched Cassandra rehearse her pitch in the conference room above the maintenance bay, he knew that the reality behind those polished slides was far different from the story being told. The yacht that looked so impressive in the photographs was currently held together by temporary fixes and constant monitoring. The revolutionary technology being promoted was actually a collection of compromised systems that barely functioned under ideal conditions. The hybrid propulsion market is projected to grow by 300% over the next 5 years. Cassandra was saying to her assembled executives, "By positioning ourselves as the leader in this technology, we're not just selling yachts, we're selling the future of recreational boating." Her confidence was absolute, the conviction of someone who had never doubted her own vision. She spoke about market penetration and competitive advantages as if the yacht's technical problems were minor inconveniences rather than fundamental flaws that threatened the entire business model. "What about the reliability issues?" asked one of the executives, a man named Peterson who seemed more cautious than the others. "All new technology has initial challenges," Cassandra replied smoothly. "Our engineering team has addressed the early concerns, and we're confident in the system's long-term performance." Mateo almost laughed at the euphemism. Initial challenges was corporate speak for the yacht barely works and requires constant expert attention to prevent catastrophic failure. The engineering team that had supposedly addressed the concerns consisted mainly of him, working alone to prevent disaster through skill and determination. The meeting continued for another hour, with Cassandra painting an increasingly rosy picture of the yacht's capabilities and market potential. She spoke about environmental benefits, operational efficiency, and customer satisfaction, as if these were proven facts rather than theoretical possibilities. The presentation was designed to answer every conceivable investor concern while avoiding any mention of the yacht's actual operational history. After the executives left, Mateo returned to his monitoring duties, checking the yacht's systems for the 100th time that day. The fuel cell temperature was creeping upward again, and the electrical system was showing new signs of instability. He made the necessary adjustments, buying them a few more hours of operation, but he knew that each fix was becoming more temporary and more fragile. The isolation was becoming harder to bear. His colleagues sympathized with his situation, but they didn't fully understand the technical complexities he was dealing with. The executives and investors saw only the yacht's impressive specifications, not the compromises and shortcuts that made those specifications meaningless in practice. And Cassandra herself seemed to exist in a bubble of willful ignorance, convinced that determination and marketing could overcome any technical obstacle. "Dad, you look tired," Diego observed when Mateo arrived home that evening. "Are you okay?" The question was simple, but it carried the weight of an 8-year-old's intuitive understanding that something was wrong. Diego had been unusually quiet lately, still processing the disappointment of the cancelled camping trip while trying to support his father through what was clearly a difficult time. "I'm fine, Mijo. just dealing with some complicated problems at work. The same problems that made you miss our camping trip. Different problems, but they're all connected. Sometimes, when people care more about money than about doing things right, it creates problems that are hard to fix. Diego considered this with the seriousness that children bring to adult concepts they're trying to understand. Is your boss still being mean to you? She's not mean exactly. She just doesn't understand that some things are more important than money. Like promises to your family. Like promises to your family. They ate dinner together at the small kitchen table, the conversation flowing around Diego's school day and his plans for the weekend. It was a normal, comfortable routine, but Mateo found himself thinking about the camping trip they should have been planning, the memories they should have been preparing to create. The next morning brought new challenges at the yacht. The fuel cell system had developed an intermittent fault that caused sudden power fluctuations, while the electrical integration was showing signs of progressive failure. Mateo spent the first 2 hours of his shift creating new workarounds, each one more complex than the last. "This is getting ridiculous," Roberto observed, watching Mateo splice yet another bypass circuit. "How long can you keep this up?" "Until something breaks that I can't fix," Mateo replied. "The system is operating beyond its design limits. Every component is stressed, every connection is fragile. It's like trying to keep a house of cards standing in a windstorm. What happens if it fails during the investor demonstration? Then everyone discovers that the emperor has no clothes." The reference wasn't lost on Roberto, who had grown up hearing his grandmother's stories about fairy tales and their moral lessons. Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing. "Maybe not," Mateo agreed, "but it would put a lot of people out of work, including us." The moral complexity of the situation was troubling. Mateo had no love for Cassandra Vale or her business practices, but he also understood that the company's failure would affect hundreds of families who depended on their paychecks. The yacht's problems weren't just technical, they were human, with real consequences for real people. As the afternoon wore on, Mateo found himself thinking about the broader implications of what he was witnessing. The yacht was a symbol of everything wrong with the modern economy, impressive on the surface, but fundamentally unsustainable underneath. It represented the triumph of marketing over engineering, of short-term thinking over long-term planning, of profit over people. But it also represented something else, the power of human expertise to overcome systemic failures. Every hour the yacht continued to operate was a testament to Mateo's skill and dedication, his ability to find solutions where others saw only problems. He was keeping the system running, not because he believed in its fundamental design, but because he took pride in his work and felt responsible for the people who depended on him. The irony wasn't lost on him. The company that couldn't spare him for 1 week of vacation was now depending on him completely to prevent a catastrophic failure that would destroy their most ambitious project. His expertise, which had been taken for granted when he was just another maintenance worker, was now the only thing standing between success and disaster. "Teo, can you come up to the conference room?" Jim's voice carried unusual urgency. "The boss wants to talk to you about the yacht." Mateo set down his tools and made his way upstairs, wondering what new crisis required his attention. The conference room was filled with executives and what appeared to be factory representatives, all looking concerned about something. "Mr. Cruz," Cassandra said, her tone more respectful than he'd ever heard it. "I understand you've been working around the clock to keep the yacht operational. I wanted to personally thank you for your dedication." The words should have felt gratifying, but they carried an undertone of desperation that made Mateo uncomfortable. This wasn't recognition of his expertise, it was acknowledgement that they needed him more than he needed them. "I'm just doing my job," he replied carefully. "Your job description doesn't include the kind of heroic effort you've been putting in. The factory representatives tell me that without your interventions, the yacht would have failed completely by now." One of the factory reps, a nervous man with thick glasses, nodded vigorously. "The system's integration is far more complex than we anticipated. Mr. Cruz's understanding of the interdependencies is remarkable, which is why I want to make sure you know how much we appreciate your efforts." Cassandra continued, After the investor presentation, I'm planning to review our compensation structure. Employees like you deserve to be rewarded for exceptional performance. The promise was vague and conditional, the kind of corporate speak that meant nothing until it was actually implemented. But Mateo could see the genuine concern in Cassandra's eyes, the recognition that her entire project depended on his continued cooperation. "I appreciate that, Miss Vale," he said, "but I want to make sure you understand the risks involved. The yacht's systems are operating at their limits. Every day we continue like this increases the chances of a catastrophic failure." Define catastrophic. Complete system shutdown, potential safety hazards, possible damage to the fuel cell stack that would require complete replacement. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The yacht that was supposed to revolutionize the industry was actually a technological disaster waiting to happen, held together by the expertise of a single technician whose vacation request had been denied without consideration. "How long can you keep it running?" Cassandra asked. "Maybe a few more days, but I can't make any guarantees. The system is fundamentally unstable. The investor presentation is tomorrow. Can you get us through that?" Mateo looked around the room at the anxious faces, understanding that his answer would determine the fate of the company's most ambitious project. The camping trip he'd been denied suddenly seemed like a trivial concern compared to the responsibility he now carried. "I'll do my best," he said, "but you need to have contingency plans in case something goes wrong." As he left the conference room, Mateo reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. A week ago, he'd been an anonymous maintenance worker whose personal needs were dismissed as irrelevant. Now he was the crucial figure in a high-stakes drama that would determine the company's future. The yacht's problems had elevated him from invisibility to indispensability, but the recognition felt hollow. He was being celebrated not for his human worth, but for his technical utility. The same corporate mentality that had denied his vacation request was now desperate for his expertise. The camping trip with Diego seemed more important than ever, not just as a promise to Maria, but as a reminder of what truly mattered. The yacht would eventually be fixed or replaced, the investors would move on to other opportunities, and the corporate drama would fade into memory. But the relationship between a father and son, the simple human connections that give life meaning, those were the things that deserved real attention and protection. As he returned to his monitoring duties, Mateo couldn't shake the feeling that the yacht's day of reckoning was approaching. The systems were operating on borrowed time, held together by expertise and determination, rather than sound engineering. When the inevitable failure occurred, it would force everyone involved to confront the difference between impressive appearances and underlying reality. The blueprint still lay on his workbench, its precise lines a reminder of what the yacht could have been if engineering excellence had been valued over cost control. But reality was what it was, and tomorrow would bring the ultimate test of whether human expertise could overcome systemic failures long enough to keep the corporate dream alive. The diagnostic report lay spread across Mateo's desk like a technical autopsy, its pages filled with data that told a story more damning than any corporate scandal. What had started as troubleshooting for one yacht had revealed a pattern of systemic failures that extended throughout the entire Vale Marine Services fleet. The numbers were undeniable: corroded electrical connections, inadequate cooling systems, and safety shortcuts that had been implemented across dozens of vessels to meet aggressive cost targets. It was 4 in the morning when Mateo finished compiling the report, his eyes burning from hours of cross-referencing maintenance records and diagnostic data. The coffee had long since gone cold, but sleep was impossible when the implications of what he'd discovered were so staggering. This wasn't just about one problematic yacht, it was about a corporate culture that had systematically prioritized profit over safety, efficiency over reliability, and appearance over substance. The yacht's failure had been spectacular and complete. At 2:47 a.m., while running what should have been a routine system check, the fuel cell stack had finally succumbed to the inadequate cooling system. The cascade failure had been exactly what Mateo had predicted. Overheating had caused the fuel cell membranes to rupture, which triggered an emergency shutdown that revealed the electrical system's fundamental instability. Within minutes, the yacht had gone from technological marvel to expensive deadweight. But the real revelation had come when Mateo began investigating the root causes of the failure. The same cost-cutting decisions that had doomed the yacht had been applied to other vessels in the fleet. The same inadequate cooling systems, the same rushed electrical integration, the same safety shortcuts that looked acceptable on paper but failed under real-world conditions. The diagnostic report documented 37 vessels with similar problems, representing nearly 40% of the Vale Marine Services fleet. Each one was a potential disaster waiting to happen, a floating lawsuit that could destroy the company and endanger the lives of anyone unfortunate enough to be aboard when the inevitable failures occurred. Mateo's phone buzzed with an urgent text from Jim. "Need you at the marina ASAP. The yacht is completely dead." The drive through the empty streets of San Diego gave Mateo time to think about the conversation he would soon have with Cassandra Vale. She would be desperate, probably panicking about the investor presentation that was scheduled to begin in just 6 hours. The yacht that was supposed to revolutionize the industry was now a $4 million paperweight, and the woman who had dismissed his vacation request without a second thought was about to discover just how much she needed his expertise. The marina was bustling with activity despite the early hour. Factory technicians, company executives, and emergency repair crews were all gathered around the disabled yacht, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. Cassandra herself stood at the center of the chaos, her usual composure cracked by the magnitude of the crisis. "Thank God you're here," she said when she saw Mateo approaching. "The entire system is down. The factory specialists have been working for 3 hours, and they can't even get a diagnostic reading." Mateo climbed aboard the yacht and made his way to the engine compartment. The damage was extensive, but not unexpected. The fuel cell stack was ruined, its delicate membranes destroyed by the excessive heat that the inadequate cooling system had been unable to dissipate. The electrical system had suffered cascade failures that would require complete rewiring to repair. The hybrid propulsion system that had been the yacht's greatest selling point was now a collection of expensive scrap metal. "Can you fix it?" Cassandra asked, her voice carrying a note of desperation that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. "Not in time for your presentation," Mateo replied honestly. "The fuel cell stack is destroyed. The electrical system needs to be completely rebuilt. You're looking at weeks of work, assuming you can get replacement parts." The color drained from Cassandra's face as the implications sank in. "There has to be something you can do, some kind of temporary fix." "I've been doing temporary fixes for days. This is what happens when you ignore fundamental design flaws and hope they'll go away." "What about the presentation? The investors are expecting a demonstration." "Then you'll have to tell them the truth. The yacht doesn't work." It was a moment of reckoning that had been building for days. The corporate fantasy that had sustained the project, the belief that marketing could overcome engineering, that determination could substitute for competence, was finally colliding with the unforgiving reality of physical laws and system limitations. But as Mateo studied the diagnostic data more carefully, he began to see patterns that were even more troubling than the yacht's failure. The same signatures that had preceded the yacht's collapse were present in the maintenance records of other vessels in the fleet. The same temperature anomalies, the same electrical fluctuations, the same gradual degradation of system performance. "Miss Vale," he said carefully, "we need to talk. This isn't just about your yacht." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the problems that destroyed your yacht exist throughout your fleet. The same cost-cutting decisions, the same design compromises, the same safety shortcuts." Cassandra's expression shifted from desperation to something approaching terror. "How many boats?" 37 that I've identified so far, maybe more." The number hit her like a physical blow. 37 vessels with similar problems meant 37 potential disasters, 37 lawsuits waiting to happen, 37 reasons why her company could face complete destruction. You're certain about this? I have the diagnostic data right here. Mateo handed her the report he'd been working on all night. Corroded electrical connections, inadequate cooling systems, safety shortcuts that look acceptable on paper but fail under stress. It's a pattern that extends across your entire operation. Cassandra read through the report with growing horror, her business acumen allowing her to understand the implications even without deep technical knowledge. Each page represented millions of dollars in potential liability, hundreds of lawsuits, and the complete destruction of the reputation she'd spent years building. This could destroy the company, she said quietly. It could destroy more than that. These are safety issues. People could get hurt. The moral dimension of the crisis was something Cassandra had never been forced to consider. Her world had been one of profit margins and market share, where human concerns were external factors to be managed rather than fundamental considerations. Now she was confronting the possibility that her decisions had created genuine dangers for the people who trusted her equipment. "What do you want?" she asked, and for the first time since Mateo had known her, she sounded genuinely humble. "I want you to understand that this isn't about what I want. This is about what needs to happen to prevent people from getting hurt." "And what's that?" "A complete safety audit of your entire fleet, immediate grounding of any vessel that shows signs of the problems I've identified, a recall program to fix the defective systems, and a fundamental change in how your company approaches engineering and safety." The scope of what Mateo was proposing was staggering. It would cost millions of dollars, delay dozens of projects, and potentially bankrupt the company. But it was also the only responsible course of action, the only way to prevent the kind of disasters that could destroy lives as well as businesses. "I can't do that," Cassandra said. "The financial impact would be catastrophic. The company couldn't survive." "The company won't survive if these problems aren't fixed. The first time someone gets hurt on one of your boats, you'll face lawsuits that make the current crisis look trivial." It was a conversation that revealed the fundamental tension between corporate priorities and human welfare. Cassandra had built her success on the assumption that financial considerations were paramount, that market forces would naturally align with human interests. Now she was discovering that sometimes doing the right thing required sacrificing short-term profits for long-term survival. "There has to be another way," she insisted, "some kind of compromise." "There is," Mateo said, "but it requires admitting that you've been wrong about fundamental things. It requires putting safety before profits, people before deadlines, and quality before cost control." The silence that followed was filled with the weight of a decision that would define not just the company's future, but Cassandra's understanding of her own responsibilities as a leader. She had spent years building an empire based on efficiency and profit maximization, only to discover that those principles had created a foundation of sand. "If I agree to what you're proposing," she said finally, "will you help me implement it? That depends on whether you're serious about making real changes or just looking for another temporary fix." "I'm serious. I have to be." It was a moment of transformation that neither of them could have anticipated. The woman who had dismissed Mateo's vacation request without a second thought was now asking for his help to rebuild her entire company. The maintenance worker whose expertise had been taken for granted was suddenly the most important person in the organization. But Mateo also understood that this was about more than just technical fixes. The yacht's failure had revealed a deeper problema, corporate culture that had lost sight of its fundamental purpose. Fixing the boats would be the easy part. Fixing the culture that had created the problems in the first place would be the real challenge. "I'll help," he said. "But I have conditions." "What kind of conditions?" "The kind that ensure this never happens again. The kind that recognize that your employees are human beings with families and lives outside of work. The kind that value expertise over hierarchy, safety over speed, and people over profits." Cassandra nodded slowly, understanding that she was agreeing to more than just a technical solution. She was accepting a fundamental restructuring of her company's values and priorities. The diagnostic report lay between them like a contract, its pages documenting not just the yacht's failure, but the failure of an entire approach to business and human relations. The road ahead would be difficult, expensive, and uncertain, but it was also the only path that led to genuine sustainability and success. As the sun began to rise over San Diego Harbor, Mateo realized that the camping trip he'd been denied had led to something far more significant than a week at the beach. The yacht's failure had created an opportunity for real change, a chance to build something better from the wreckage of corporate short-sightedness. The investors would have to be told the truth. The fleet would have to be grounded and rebuilt. The company would have to embrace new priorities and new ways of working. It would be a long and difficult process, but it was also the only way forward. And somewhere in the midst of all this corporate drama, a father and son would finally get their camping trip, not as a reward for heroic service, but as a recognition of the simple truth that some promises are more important than any business deal. Mateo's oscilloscope sat on the workbench like a talisman of technical truth, its small screen capable of revealing the electrical secrets that had eluded teams of factory specialists and engineers. The handheld device, no bigger than a smartphone, represented the kind of diagnostic precision that separated true expertise from mere technical knowledge. While others relied on computerized systems and automated diagnostics, Mateo understood that sometimes the most complex problems required the most fundamental tools. The atmosphere in the maintenance bay was electric, with tension as teams of technicians prepared for what everyone understood would be a make-or-break effort. The investor presentation had been postponed by 12 hours, giving them one final chance to resurrect the yacht from its spectacular failure. Factory representatives huddled around laptops, corporate executives paced nervously, and emergency repair crews stood ready to implement whatever solution Mateo might devise. "The fuel cell stack is completely destroyed," reported one of the factory technicians, his voice carrying the defeat of someone who had exhausted all conventional options. "The membranes are ruptured, the cooling circuits are contaminated, and the electrical interfaces are fried. We're looking at a complete replacement." "How long would that take?" Cassandra asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't be what she wanted to hear. "Minimum 6 weeks for parts delivery, assuming we can get priority status from the manufacturer. Installation and testing would take another 2 weeks. The timeline was impossible. The investors were already in San Diego, their schedules coordinated around the demonstration that was supposed to showcase the future of marine propulsion technology. Canceling the presentation would mean losing not just this opportunity, but potentially destroying the company's credibility in the emerging hybrid marine market. Mateo studied the oscilloscope's readings from the yacht's electrical system, his experienced eye interpreting the waveforms that told the story of the cascade failure. The patterns were complex, but not incomprehensibly, symphony of electrical chaos that revealed both the extent of the damage and the potential pathways to recovery. "What if we don't replace the fuel cell stack?" he said quietly, his words cutting through the despair that had settled over the group. "Without the fuel cell, it's just a conventional diesel yacht," one of the factory reps pointed out. "The whole hybrid concept becomes meaningless." Not necessarily. Mateo was already mentally designing a solution that would have seemed impossible to anyone without his deep understanding of marine electrical systems. The fuel cell stack is destroyed, but the support systems are still functional. The hydrogen storage tanks are intact. The electrical distribution network just needs rewiring, and the diesel engine is undamaged. "I don't understand," Cassandra said. "How can you run a hybrid system without the fuel cell?" "You can't, but you can simulate one long enough to demonstrate the concept." Mateo's fingers traced the electrical pathways on the yacht schematic. The fuel cell was essentially a sophisticated battery charger. It used hydrogen to generate electricity that powered the electric motors. "If I can create a direct connection between the diesel engine and the electrical system, with proper power conditioning, the yacht will behave exactly like a hybrid for demonstration purposes." The silence that followed was filled with the weight of understanding. What Mateo was proposing wasn't a permanent solution, it was an elaborate technical magic trick that would allow the yacht to function normally for a few hours while hiding the fundamental problems that had caused the failure. "Is that even possible?" asked Jim Hendricks. "With the right components and about 18 hours of work, yes. But it would require completely rewiring the electrical integration and creating custom power conditioning circuits. And it would only work for short periods, maybe 4 hours of operation, before the improvised systems would start to fail." "4 hours is enough for the demonstration," Cassandra said, her voice carrying the desperate hope of someone grasping at the only available lifeline. "It's also dangerous," Mateo continued. "The improvised systems won't have the safety redundancies of the original design. If something goes wrong during the demonstration, the results could be catastrophic." The moral complexity of the situation was staggering. Mateo was being asked to create a technological illusion that would allow investors to make decisions based on incomplete information. The yacht would appear to function normally, but it would actually be held together by temporary fixes that could fail at any moment. "What are the real risks?" Cassandra asked. "Electrical fire, system overload, possible engine damage if the power conditioning fails. In the worst-case scenario, you could lose the yacht completely. And if we don't try, then you definitely lose the investors, probably lose the company, and certainly lose the jobs of everyone who depends on Vale Marine Services." It was a calculation that revealed the impossible choices faced by people in positions of responsibility. The safe course was to admit failure and accept the consequences, but that would mean destroying the livelihoods of hundreds of employees who had done nothing wrong. The risky course offered a chance of survival, but it required gambling with both money and safety. "How certain are you that this will work?" Cassandra asked. "For the demonstration, maybe 70% chance of success. For long-term operation, 0%. And after the demonstration, then we have the conversation about what needs to happen to fix the real problems, the fleet-wide safety audit, the recall program, the fundamental changes to how the company operates." Cassandra looked around the room at the faces of her employees, technicians who had families to support, engineers who had invested their careers in the company, executives who had built their reputations on the success of this project. The weight of their collective futures was visible in her expression. "What do you need?" she asked. "Complete authority over the repair process. No interference from factory reps or corporate executives. Access to any components or equipment I require. And a guarantee that after the demonstration we address the real problems instead of just celebrating the temporary success." Done. The next 18 hours would test every skill Mateo had acquired over his career. The oscilloscope would be his primary diagnostic tool, its ability to reveal the subtle electrical signatures that indicated system health or failure. But the real challenge would be mental designing and implementing a solution that had never been attempted before, under time pressure that allowed no room for error. As the teams dispersed to gather the necessary components, Mateo found himself alone with the disabled yacht and the weight of responsibility that had somehow fallen on his shoulders. The camping trip with Diego seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a crisis that would determine the fate of everyone he worked with. The irony wasn't lost on him. A week ago, he had been just another maintenance worker whose personal needs were dismissed as irrelevant. Now he was the crucial figure in a high-stakes drama that would determine whether the company survived or collapsed. The expertise that had been taken for granted was suddenly the most valuable asset in the organization. But Mateo also understood that this moment represented more than just a technical challenge. It was a test of character, a decision about what kind of person he wanted to be and what kind of world he wanted to help create. He could use his leverage to demand personal concessions, or he could focus on the broader goal of building a better, safer, more humane workplace. The oscilloscope hummed quietly as he began the first diagnostic tests, its screen displaying the electrical heartbeat of systems that would soon be rebuilt from the ground up. The yacht's problems had created an opportunity for real change, a chance to prove that technical expertise and human values could coexist in the corporate world. The countdown to the investor presentation had begun, and with it, the most important 18 hours of Mateo's professional life. The success or failure of his improvised solution would determine not just his own future, but the futures of everyone who depended on Vale Marine Services for their livelihoods. As he began the delicate work of rewiring the yacht's electrical system, Mateo thought about Diego waiting at home, probably wondering why his father had been working such long hours. The camping trip they'd been denied had led to something far more significant, chance to transform not just a company, but an entire approach to how people should be treated in the workplace. The yacht's engines were silent now, but they would roar to life again before the day was over. Whether that resurrection would be permanent or temporary remained to be seen, but the lessons learned in the process would echo far beyond the confines of any corporate presentation or investor meeting. The oscilloscope continued its quiet work, measuring voltages and frequencies with the precision that would be essential to the success of the most ambitious repair project of Mateo's career. The device represented everything he valued about technical work accuracy, reliability, and the ability to reveal truth in a world often dominated by appearance and perception. The next few hours would determine whether expertise could triumph over expediency, whether safety could coexist with profit, and whether one man's knowledge could save a company that had forgotten the value of the people who made its success possible. The jury-rigged cooling system stretched across the yacht's engine compartment like a mechanical spiderweb, its improvised tubing and connections representing the kind of creative problem-solving that separated true craftsmen from mere technicians. Mateo had spent the last 4 hours building what amounted to a complete life support system for the yacht's remaining functional components, using desalination tubing, surplus heat exchangers, and a collection of pumps and valves that had been scavenged from other vessels in the fleet. The work was delicate and dangerous, requiring him to crawl through cramped spaces while making connections that had to be both temporary and absolutely reliable. A single loose fitting could flood the engine compartment with coolant, while an improperly sealed joint could create the kind of leak that would leave the yacht dead in the water miles from shore. "The coolant flow rates are looking good," Roberto reported from his position, monitoring the improvised system. "Temperatures holding steady at the target range." "What about the electrical load?" Mateo asked, his voice muffled by the engine housing he was working behind. "Stable so far. The power conditioning circuits are handling the conversion better than expected." It was a small victory in what had been a night of constant challenges and near disasters. The yacht's hybrid propulsion system was gone, destroyed by the cascade failure that had revealed the fundamental flaws in its design. In its place, Mateo had created something that had never existed before: a diesel-electric system that could mimic the behavior of a fuel cell hybrid for just long enough to convince investors that the technology was viable. The technical complexity of what he had accomplished was staggering. The yacht's diesel engine was now directly connected to a bank of electrical generators, which fed power through custom conditioning circuits to the electric motors that drove the propellers. The fuel cell management system had been replaced with a computer program that Mateo had written himself, running on his personal laptop and controlling the entire power distribution network. But the real innovation was the cooling system. The destroyed fuel cell stack had been replaced with a carefully calibrated heat exchanger that simulated the thermal characteristics of hydrogen-powered operation. The improvised cooling circuits maintained the precise temperature control that the electric motors required, while the desalination tubing provided the flexible connections needed to route coolant through the modified system. "How's the control software responding?" Mateo asked, emerging from the engine compartment with grease-stained hands and sweat-soaked clothes. "Like a charm, the laptop is talking to all the systems, and the response curves look almost identical to the original fuel cell profile." It was another small miracle. The control software that Mateo had written in 6 hours of intensive coding was managing the complex interactions between diesel engines, electrical generators, power conditioning circuits, and electric propulsion motors. The yacht's behavior would be indistinguishable from a true hybrid system, at least for the duration of the investor demonstration. But Mateo knew that every component of his improvised system was operating at the edge of its capabilities. The electrical generators were running at maximum output, the cooling circuits were stressed beyond their design limits, and the control software was managing interactions that had never been tested under real-world conditions. "The question is whether it'll hold together long enough," he said, wiping his hands on a shop rag while studying the system monitoring displays. "How long do we need?" The presentation is scheduled for 4 hours, 2 hours of harbor operation, followed by 2 hours of open water demonstration. If everything works perfectly, we might just make it. The qualifier was important. Mateo's improvised system had no safety redundancies, no backup components, and no margin for error. A single component failure could cascade through the entire network, leaving the yacht stranded in open water with a boatload of confused investors. "What's the worst-case scenario?" Roberto asked. "Complete electrical failure about 3 miles offshore, with no way to restart the engines and no backup propulsion. The Coast Guard would have to tow us back to port." "And the best-case scenario?" "The demonstration goes perfectly, the investors are impressed, and we get 4 hours to celebrate before the system starts eating itself." It was a sobering reminder of the temporary nature of what they had accomplished. The yacht would function normally for the presentation, but it would never be a reliable vessel. The fundamental design flaws that had caused the original failure remained unaddressed, hidden beneath layers of technical improvisation and creative problem-solving. As the sun began to rise over San Diego Harbor, Mateo made the final connections to his jury-rigged cooling system. The desalination tubing snaked through the engine compartment like arteries in a mechanical heart, carrying coolant to components that had never been designed to work together. Each connection represented hours of careful calculation and testing, ensuring that the improvised system would function reliably for exactly as long as needed. "It's time," he said, his finger hovering over the startup sequence. "Everyone ready?" The small team of technicians nodded nervously. They had all worked through the night, contributing their expertise to a project that defied conventional engineering wisdom. The yacht they were about to restart bore little resemblance to the vessel that had failed so spectacularly 18 hours earlier. Mateo initiated the startup sequence, his laptop screen displaying the cascade of system checks that would determine whether months of work and millions of dollars in investment would survive the morning. The diesel engine turned over with a satisfying rumble, followed by the quiet whir of electrical generators coming online. The power conditioning circuits activated smoothly, converting the rough electrical output of the diesel generators into the precise voltages and frequencies required by the electric propulsion system. The improvised cooling system began circulating coolant through the modified heat exchangers, maintaining the thermal stability that the electric motors required. "All systems green," Roberto reported, his voice carrying the amazement of someone witnessing the impossible. "The yacht is operational." For the first time in almost a day, the yacht's electrical systems were functioning normally. The navigation displays showed proper readings, the propulsion controls responded correctly, and the hybrid system appeared to be operating exactly as designed. Only Mateo knew that the apparent normalcy was an illusion, maintained by improvised components that were operating far beyond their intended parameters. "Take us out for a test run," he said. "Gentle acceleration, stay within the harbor, and keep the power levels conservative." The yacht moved away from the dock with the whisper-quiet operation that had been its most impressive feature. The electric motors provided smooth acceleration with none of the vibration or noise of conventional marine propulsion. To anyone watching from shore, it would appear that the technological marvel was functioning exactly as advertised. But Mateo's attention was focused on the monitoring displays, watching for the subtle signs that would indicate impending failure. The coolant temperatures were holding steady, the electrical loads were within acceptable limits, and the control software was managing the complex system interactions without apparent difficulty. "How does it feel?" Roberto asked. "Like riding a tiger," Mateo replied. "Exciting while it lasts, but you know it's not going to end well." The test run continued for 30 minutes, with the yacht performing flawlessly under the controlled conditions of harbor operation. The improvised cooling system maintained proper temperatures, the electrical systems showed no signs of instability, and the propulsion responded smoothly to throttle inputs. As they returned to the dock, Mateo allowed himself a moment of professional satisfaction. What he had accomplished in 18 hours was nothing short of miraculous, transforming a $4 million failure into a functional demonstration vehicle through pure technical expertise and creative problem-solving. But he also understood that the real test was still to come. The investor presentation would subject the yacht to sustained operation under more demanding conditions, with the added pressure of performing flawlessly in front of people who represented the company's future. The jury-rigged cooling system had passed its first test, but the morning's gentle harbor cruise was nothing compared to the challenges that lay ahead. The yacht would need to maintain its facade of technological sophistication for 4 hours of intensive operation, with no room for error and no opportunity for repairs if something went wrong. As the yacht settled against the dock, Mateo knew that he had done everything possible to ensure success. The improvised systems were as reliable as 18 hours of intensive work could make them. The cooling circuits were properly sealed and tested. The electrical connections were secure and stable. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. The investors would arrive in just 2 hours, expecting to see the future of marine propulsion technology. What they would actually see was a testament to human ingenuity and the power of expertise to overcome seemingly impossible challenges. The jury-rigged cooling system hummed quietly in the engine compartment, its improvised components working in harmony to maintain the illusion of technological perfection. For now, at least, the yacht was ready for its moment of truth. The repaired engine purred with deceptive smoothness as the yacht glided through the harbor entrance, its improvised systems performing flawlessly under the scrutiny of a dozen investors who had flown in from around the world to witness what they believed was the future of marine propulsion. The morning sun cast golden light across the water, creating the perfect backdrop for what would either be a technological triumph or a spectacular disaster. Mateo stood in the engine compartment, monitoring the jury-rigged systems that were maintaining the illusion of hybrid perfection. His laptop screen displayed cascading data streams that told the real story: coolant, temperatures running higher than ideal, electrical loads approaching critical thresholds, and control parameters that were being constantly adjusted to prevent system failures. "The investors seem impressed," Roberto reported through the intercom. "They're asking technical questions about fuel efficiency and range capabilities." "How is Cassandra handling the questions?" Mateo asked, making a minor adjustment to the cooling flow rate. "Like a pro, she's sticking to the prepared talking points and deflecting anything too specific." It was a delicate dance of corporate theater, with Cassandra playing the role of visionary CEO, while Mateo worked behind the scenes to maintain the technological illusion that made the performance possible. The investors were seeing exactly what they expected to see: a sleek yacht that operated with whisper-quiet efficiency, powered by what appeared to be a revolutionary hybrid propulsion system. The yacht's acceleration was smooth and responsive as they left the harbor and entered open water. The electric motors provided instant torque with none of the lag or vibration of conventional marine engines. To anyone unfamiliar with the yacht's troubled history, it would appear to be operating exactly as designed. But Mateo knew better. The diesel engine was running at 80% capacity to generate the electrical power needed for the demonstration. The improvised cooling system was working at its limits to dissipate the excess heat generated by the overloaded generators. The control software was making hundreds of micro-adjustments per minute to prevent the kind of cascade failure that had destroyed the original fuel cell system. Coolant temperature is climbing, he noted, adjusting the pump flow rates. Still within acceptable limits, but we're getting close to the thermal threshold. How much longer can we maintain this? Roberto asked. Maybe 2 hours of open water operation. After that, we're going to start seeing component failures. The timeline was tight, but manageable. The demonstration was scheduled for 3 hours total, with the final hour being a return to harbor where the reduced power demands would allow the system to cool down. If everything went according to plan, they would make it back to the dock, just as the improvised systems reached their failure point. Above deck, Cassandra was conducting what appeared to be a flawless presentation. The investors were taking notes, asking questions, and generally behaving like people who were impressed by what they were seeing. The yacht's performance was meeting every expectation, its hybrid systems delivering the kind of efficiency and sophistication that the marine industry had been promising for years. The environmental benefits are remarkable, one of the investors was saying. 0 emissions for harbor operations, extended range for open water cruising, and noise levels that are barely detectable. It's exactly what the luxury market has been waiting for. Cassandra replied, Our surveys show that high-end buyers are increasingly concerned about environmental impact. This technology gives them the performance they want with a clear conscience. The conversation continued with the smooth confidence of a successful sales presentation, but Mateo knew that every word was built on the foundation of his improvised engineering. The yacht was performing beautifully, but its performance was maintained by systems that were operating far beyond their design parameters. We're getting some electrical fluctuations on the secondary generator, Roberto reported. Nothing critical yet, but it's something to watch. Mateo checked his monitoring displays and confirmed the observation. The electrical generators were showing signs of stress, their output waveforms becoming less stable as the components heated up. It was the kind of gradual degradation that would eventually lead to failure, but for now, the fluctuations were within acceptable limits. Reduce the electrical load by 5%, he instructed. Route more power through the primary generator. The adjustment was seamless, invisible to anyone not monitoring the system parameters. The yacht continued to perform flawlessly, its electric motors providing smooth acceleration and precise control. The investors remained impressed, their questions becoming more detailed and their interest more obvious. As the demonstration entered its second hour, Mateo found himself in a strange state of professional pride mixed with moral uncertainty. What he had accomplished was genuinely remarkable, transforming a catastrophic failure into a functional demonstration vehicle through pure technical expertise. But he was also enabling a deception that could have serious consequences for everyone involved. The yacht's apparent success would likely result in significant investment, which would fund the development of more vessels with similar flaws. The investors were making decisions based on incomplete information, unaware that the technology they were admiring was held together by temporary fixes and creative improvisation. Temperature spike on the primary heat exchanger, Roberto warned. We're approaching the thermal limit. Mateo made rapid adjustments to the cooling system, redirecting flow through the secondary circuits and reducing the power output of the most stressed components. The yacht's performance remained smooth, but the margin for error was disappearing with each passing minute. How much longer? He asked. According to the schedule, about 90 minutes until we head back to harbor. It would be close. The improvised systems were approaching their thermal limits, and the electrical components were showing increasing signs of stress. But the yacht was still performing flawlessly, and the investors remained impressed by what they were seeing. The fuel efficiency numbers are extraordinary, one of the investors was saying. How do they compare to conventional diesel propulsion? Approximately 40% better for mixed operation, Cassandra replied. The hybrid system allows us to optimize power delivery for different operating conditions. The numbers were technically accurate, based on the original fuel cell specifications. but they bore no relationship to the actual performance of the improvised system, which was consuming fuel at a rate that would have been embarrassing under normal circumstances. As the demonstration continued, Mateo found himself thinking about the broader implications of what they were doing. The yacht's apparent success would validate Cassandra's business model and attract the investment needed to expand the company's operations. But it would also perpetuate the same cost-cutting mentality that had created the problems in the first place. "We're starting to see some instability in the control software," Roberto reported. "The system is working harder to maintain stable output." "Compensate with manual overrides," Mateo instructed. "We just need to hold together for another hour." The yacht continued its demonstration cruise, its performance remaining smooth and impressive despite the growing stress on its improvised systems. The investors were clearly satisfied with what they were seeing, their questions becoming more focused on business terms and investment details. But Mateo knew that the real moment of truth was still approaching. The return to harbor would require sustained operation under changing conditions, with the added challenge of precise maneuvering in crowded waters. The improvised systems that had performed so well in open water would face their ultimate test in the confined spaces of San Diego Harbor. The repaired engine continued to purr with deceptive smoothness, its improvised cooling system and jury-rigged electrical connections maintaining the illusion of technological perfection. For now, at least, the yacht was fulfilling its promise as a revolutionary hybrid vessel. Whether that promise could be sustained for the remainder of the demonstration remained to be seen. The improvised systems were approaching their limits, held together by expertise and determination rather than sound engineering principles. The next hour would determine whether human ingenuity could triumph over the laws of physics, or whether the yacht's fundamental flaws would finally assert themselves at the worst possible moment. The investors remained blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding beneath their feet. Their attention focused on the smooth performance and impressive specifications of what they believed was a mature technology. The yacht's success was real, but its sustainability was an illusion that could shatter at any moment. The new employment contract lay on Mateo's kitchen table beside Diego's hand-drawn camping map, the official document representing a transformation that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. The corporate letterhead bore the redesigned logo of Vale Marine Services, but the content represented something far more significant than a simple job promotion. It was a blueprint for a new kind of workplace culture, one that valued expertise over hierarchy, safety over speed, and people over profits. "Director of Marine Safety and Standards," Diego read aloud, his 8-year-old voice stumbling slightly over the technical terms. "That sounds really important, Dad." "It is important, Mijo. It means I get to make sure that boats are safe for the people who use them." The position was entirely new, created as part of the comprehensive restructuring that had followed the yacht demonstration. The investors had been impressed enough to provide funding, but their due diligence had revealed the same systemic problems that Mateo had identified. The resulting negotiations had produced not just financial backing, but a mandate for fundamental changes in how the company operated. The contract outlined responsibilities that went far beyond traditional maintenance work. Mateo would oversee safety audits for the entire fleet, establish new engineering standards for future projects, and lead a team of technicians who would be empowered to halt operations if they identified potential safety issues. It was the kind of authority that most marine technicians could only dream of, but it also came with the weight of responsibility for hundreds of lives. "When do we leave for our camping trip?" Diego asked, his finger tracing the route on his carefully drawn map. "Tomorrow morning, just like we planned. I've got a whole week off, officially approved by the company." The vacation time was part of the new employee benefits package that had been negotiated as part of the restructuring. Paid family leave, profit-sharing arrangements, and flexible scheduling were now standard for all technical staff. The company that had once dismissed employee needs as irrelevant had discovered that treating people well was actually good for business. The transformation hadn't been easy. The fleet-wide safety audit had revealed problems in 43 vessels, requiring massive recalls and repairs that had cost millions of dollars. Several major contracts had been delayed, and the company's reputation had taken a significant hit when the scope of the safety issues became public. But the crisis had also created opportunities. The investment funding had allowed Vale Marine Services to hire additional engineers and technicians, expand their facilities, and implement the kind of quality control systems that should have been in place from the beginning. The company that emerged from the crisis was smaller but more sustainable, focused on long-term success rather than short-term profits. "Mrs. Peterson says you're famous now," Diego mentioned, referring to his second-grade teacher. "She showed the class a newspaper article about you." The media attention had been unexpected and somewhat uncomfortable. The story of a single technician saving a company through expertise and integrity had resonated with people who were tired of corporate scandals and executive incompetence. Mateo had been interviewed by trade magazines, invited to speak at industry conferences, and even featured in a documentary about workplace safety. But fame wasn't what mattered to him. What mattered was the knowledge that his work was making a real difference in people's lives. The new safety standards he'd helped implement were being adopted by other companies throughout the industry. The fleet recall had prevented potential accidents that could have injured or killed innocent people. The cultural changes at Vale Marine Services were creating a more humane workplace for everyone. "Are you excited about the camping trip?" Mateo asked, though Diego's bright smile made the answer obvious. "I've been packed for 3 days. I even wrote a letter to Mom, telling her about all the things we're going to do." The letter was carefully folded and tucked into Diego's backpack, along with his sleeping bag, camp chair, and a collection of books about marine life that he planned to read by the campfire. The trip would be everything that Maria had wanted for the unstructured time together, away from work pressures and daily responsibilities, with space for the kind of conversations that strengthen the bonds between fathers and sons. The camping gear was spread across the living room, testament to the careful planning that had gone into the trip. Mateo had chosen a campground near La Jolla, where the beaches were pristine and the tide pools were filled with the kind of marine life that fascinated Diego. They would swim, surf, explore, and simply enjoy each other's company in the way that Maria had envisioned. "Dad, do you think Mom would be proud of what you did?" Diego asked. His question carrying the weight of a child trying to understand adult complexities. "I think she'd be proud that we kept our promise to her. The camping trip was important, but keeping promises is what really matters." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mateo opened it to find Cassandra Vale standing on his doorstep, holding a small gift bag and looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "I wanted to bring something for Diego before you leave for your trip." The gift was a high-quality digital camera, designed to withstand the rigors of outdoor adventure. "I thought he might want to document your camping experiences," she explained. "Every family tradition deserves to be preserved." "Thank you," Diego said politely, examining the camera with obvious excitement. "I can take pictures of the fish in the tide pools." "That's exactly what I hoped you'd do," Cassandra replied. "Your father taught me that some things are more important than business meetings." The transformation in Cassandra had been as dramatic as the changes in the company. The crisis had forced her to confront the human cost of her corporate decisions, leading to a fundamental reassessment of her priorities and values. She was still demanding and ambitious, but she now understood that sustainable success required treating employees as valuable human beings rather than expendable resources. "How are the new safety protocols working out?" Mateo asked. "Better than expected. The technicians are more engaged, the quality of work has improved significantly, and we've actually reduced costs by preventing problems instead of fixing them after they occur." It was a validation of the principle that Mateo had tried to communicate from the beginning, that expertise and safety were investments, not expenses. The company that had once viewed his knowledge as a commodity to be exploited had discovered that respecting that knowledge was the key to long-term success. "I wanted to thank you again." Cassandra continued, "not just for fixing the yacht, but for showing me what leadership really means. I was so focused on commanding respect that I forgot about earning it." The admission was significant, representing a level of personal growth that few executives achieve. Cassandra had learned that true authority comes not from position or wealth, but from the ability to inspire people to do their best work. "The real test will be maintaining these changes over time," Mateo said. "It's easy to prioritize people when you're in crisis mode. The challenge is remembering those priorities when business is good. That's why we created the Safety Oversight Board, with you as the chairman. Even if I forget what's important, you'll be there to remind me." As Cassandra left, Mateo reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. The vacation request that had been denied with such casual cruelty had ultimately led to a transformation that benefited everyone in the company. The yacht's failure had revealed problems that needed to be addressed, creating opportunities for real improvement. The camping trip that had seemed so important a few weeks earlier now felt like just one part of a larger story about keeping promises and maintaining integrity. The week with Diego would be wonderful, but it was the daily choices, the decision to prioritize safety over speed, people over profits, and truth over convenience that would define their future. "Are you ready for tomorrow, my Joe?" Mateo asked as they finished packing the camping gear. "I've been ready for months," Diego replied, "but I'm glad we waited until now. I think this trip is going to be even more special than we planned." The wisdom in his son's words was remarkable. The delayed trip would indeed be more meaningful because of what they'd been through together. The camping experience would be enriched by the knowledge that promises kept are worth fighting for, that integrity matters more than convenience, and that some things are truly more important than money. As they prepared for bed, Mateo looked at Maria's journal one more time, reading the passage about healing and shared experiences. The camping trip would provide the space for reflection and connection that she'd wanted for them, but it would also be a celebration of the principle that had guided their journey, that keeping promises to the people you love is worth any sacrifice. The new employment contract sat on the kitchen table, its terms representing not just a job promotion, but a validation of the idea that expertise and integrity could coexist with corporate success. The company that had once dismissed Mateo's family needs as irrelevant had discovered that supporting those needs was actually good for business. Tomorrow would bring the camping trip they'd been planning for so long. But tonight Mateo felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that they'd kept faith with Maria's vision. The promise had been honored, the principles had been maintained, and the future looked brighter than it had in years. The yacht that had seemed so important just weeks earlier was now just another vessel in a fleet of properly maintained boats. The real victory wasn't in fixing machines, but in proving that people and companies could change, that integrity could triumph over expediency, and that sometimes the most important journeys begin with the simple act of keeping a promise to someone you love. As father and son settled into sleep, the camping map remained spread on the kitchen table, its bright colors, a reminder that tomorrow would bring new adventures and new opportunities to strengthen the bonds that make families strong. The journey that had begun with a denied vacation request had led to something far more valuable, deeper understanding of what truly matters in life and work.